I'm like, who would ever need to do that for that long?
Yeah,
Like it's a marathon and a half.
that's too long.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's funny because I never know how to start these. It's because it's not like the flow of the show isn't the same as just doing these kind of interviews canned and then chopping together an intro or whatever. So yeah, joining me at this time from Waking the Red, among other things, James Grossi, Toronto FC2 extraordinaire. Is it fair to say that you do it so no one else has to? Is that
I sort of view it as the way that this club is set up is these guys are going to be making their leap to the first team.
Mhm.
So, if I start talking to them when they're 16 or 17, by the time they're 20 or 21, I've built up a bit of a rapport.
Mhm.
And it's kind of fun too. It's a different kind of soccer. There's a different sort of feel to it. It's to say it's less professional wouldn't be the right term, but it's a little more sort of casual, a little more laid back, a little less, under the pressure that the first team sort of lives with.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and especially, and this is, it'll be two of us gushing about MLS2 teams for, a half hour or whatever. But I think especially, like, and I don't know if it's the same with you guys, or if you've heard any of those conversations, but really, truly, at the end of the day, the results don't matter as much as the team hates losing or the guys on the team hate losing. It's all about player development. And, like you said, I mean, there's a bunch of guys, I think six guys that played with Steele for like a year and now are in the first team, and there's 17 guys in the first team outfit that have played in Bethlehem. So it's one of those things where if you catch them early, you can kind of, like Matt Real and Mark McKenzie at the MLS draft, I bumped into and congratulated, and that was a cool moment for me. So definitely get where you're coming from on that one.
Yeah, back back when I started following MLS, the Super Draft was, it was fun, and the first 15 picks or so would sort of be
Right.
relevant to your first team.
Yeah.
And the last couple of years, we've really seen that jump from college to the professional game is such a distance that giving the guys a couple of years to sort of
Mm.
percolate at this USL level really lets you sort of find out what a guy's about and what his future holds.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Hey, so that being said, I didn't just drag you on here to talk about, the as much as I think that's interesting, and as much as I'd probably like to do that at some point down the road with a bunch of people. But we're here to talk about Toronto FC too.
Indeed.
Um, yeah, so just, maybe talk about a little bit, what you guys are, who you guys are, who's in charge up there, and things like that.
So this is the side's fourth season in USL. They were founded back in 2015, and it was, since Greg Vanny came in and Tim Bezbachenko, one of the real focuses over these past 4 years or so has been taking the academy structure that the club started to develop way back in 2008 2009, and sort of making a comprehensive player pathway from those academy teams down to U12 all the way up to the first team. And so USL sort of bridged the gap between the under 8 teams. They have a TFC3, which plays in what's called League One Ontario, and that's sort of an under 20 semi professional sort of setup.
Mm.
And so USL sort of provides that extra bridge for the players that are making their way up to the first team. Last season the team played under Jason Bent, who had been the only first team coach that they had known. And it was announced in the off season that Bent would be moving up to the first team staff, sorry. And Laurent Guillot would be taking over first team duties with TFC2.
Mm.
Laurent has been with the club for a couple of years. He's a very interesting guy. He's very intelligent about the game. He's had a very long career, both as a defender himself over in France with several clubs, and then as both a first team and a youth manager over there. And prior to joining TFC, he was actually working for the French Football Federation
Mm.
as the instructor for their coaches for national youth teams. And so, if you remember, a couple of years ago, the MLS academies and the FFF created a partnership where the MLS academy coaches would start going over to France and spending some time there and developing their sort of technical coaching abilities. Laurent was actually at the head of that
Mm.
alliance, and so that's sort of how we came onto TFC's radar. You know, we haven't really seen a whole lot of the team so far this preseason. They've had a couple of friendlies. They played Syracuse. They're down in Arizona right now, sort of getting their legs under them. And looking at the roster, they have 14 contracted players at this point, which is I know there's a bunch of trialists. I know there are several guys on the first team that are likely going to see significant minutes down there, but without having really seen them, and then there's also the 4 players Toronto FC selected in the Super Draft that are likely going to be sticking with 2 this year. Without having seen them, we're really not exactly sure quite what to expect. As you were saying before, one of the difficulties with these MLS2 teams is they're trying to wear 2 hats.
Yes.
They're trying to win, which is what any professional outfit wants to do when they play football, but they're also trying to develop players. And there's an old adage that I always think of whenever they swear up and down that they're both are their primary aims, that if you have 2 objectives, you really have no objectives. And for everything that we've seen in terms of the development of players, it's worth mentioning Raheem Edwards, who sort of, came to the first team like a lightning bolt last year. And he actually made his debut the year before momentarily. He was a product of this. He was playing university soccer here in Toronto, and he ended up joining up with TFC2. And his development over those 2 years was exciting for everyone to see. But the results on the pitch have not been great. In their 3 previous years, they have won 6 matches each year. They set a new club record for points last season with 25, but I think that may have just had to do with the fact that there were more games last year with the league expansion.
Yeah.
Because they also set a club record for losses in a season. They've never made the playoffs. It's been a difficult adjustment process, and a big part of that is sort of, you look across the league and you see guys who are 25, 26, 27. You see experienced guys. Like I remember when they played against Tampa Bay early in the season last year, you're going up against Joe Cole and like these savvy veterans.
Sure. Yeah.
And you're a 17-year-old. Now it being the 4th year, they're returning a solid core of players who have been there for those couple of years. And so, we'll sort of see what this year is going to look like. But as of now, it's sort of a big question mark.
Sure. And I think that's one thing. And I told you that, before we started recording, is people get that. And it's definitely kind of interesting, week to week, I'm sure for you as well as myself or anyone else that covers an MLS2 side to see, what you get in a way from the first team, because there's some weeks where you go, oh, okay, well, there's, Adam Niem, or for Bethlehem, 2 years ago now, it's Maurice Adu of all people, where and it's a very strange balancing act. And like you said, I know Raheem Edwards immediately a guy that jumps right off the page as people that have come through that organization, and even developing coaches too. Jason Bent, a guy who I very much enjoyed as a personality on the sidelines. Him and Brendan, I felt bad for the 4th official every time those 2 guys were sharing the touchline. And he's a very nice guy after the game, and professional. So it's nice to see him move up to the first team. But man, what a get for you guys. To have a guy who with so much experience and so much relevant experience, or as far as developing players go, that's, for a club where that's your big goal, or maybe that's the thing more than results that people should look at or watch for this year, then, to find a guy like that, there's not too many of him in the world, really.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to speak to him in this new role, but I'd spoken to him in his previous capacity as academy director, which is a role he will also be fulfilling this year. And he's a very interesting guy. He's very intelligent about the game. He's very intelligent about the coaching ethos. And part of his role here as academy director was that sort of developing the internal academy coaches.
Sure.
TFC has teams going all the way down to the U12, and like Benoit Cheroux is now taking over one of those positions.
Hey.
Danny Dichio coaches TFC 3. And if you remember Terry Dunfield from back in the day, he's in-house too. So
okay,
to have somebody like him taking over this role is really exciting. And Jason's been with the club for almost as long as the club has been in existence, and he's a good guy. I really enjoyed my time speaking with him last year.
Yeah, and then and we just talked about how this will be an incredibly difficult exercise for you. But who are you looking out for in the year coming up? And maybe because of that academy structure and having probably one of the better academies around, if not definitely in all of Canada, maybe some academy kids that you're looking forward to getting some playing time with TFC too.
Yeah, so when I sort of look at the roster, and as I was saying, that it's a pretty slim roster
Hmm.
at the moment.
Sure.
You can sort of break it into three different groups. There are the returning core of players, and those are sort of the guys who have been with the team for the last couple of years. You're thinking of, a Luca Cello, who looked really good last year.
Yep.
Sean Hundle, who sort of came on really strong there at the end. Um, Aiden Daniels is another guy who sort of stepped into his third or fourth season and really came on last year. Malik Johnson is a very tricky sort of attacking player. And so those are sort of the that young core that's going to be going into their third or fourth season that'll be leaned on to be really heavy starters. And then on top of that, there's a couple of older players. There's Angelo Cavalluzzo, who really sort of proved his worth last year in
Yep.
goal. There's Ryan Telfer, who was a really exciting sort of wide attacker. And then along with those older players, there's sort of an international aspect to it. Jelani Peters was a big center back that came in last year and was excellent before he ended up doing his knee and missing large parts of the season. They've they have another Caribbean guy, Ike Andrews, who's a bullish, tenacious sort of forward that'll be expected to do really well last year. And they brought in last season as well. They brought in a Panamanian named Luis Pereira, who we only saw little glimpses of, but this is sort of an example of an MLS team using their USL side to bring in international players and get an extended look at them and see what they're like. And most recently, they signed a 21-year-old African kid named Gideon Waya, who we haven't seen anything from him, but it's just interesting to see them sort of putting those feelers out. And then the third sort of group is the 16 and 17-year-olds that they sort of brought up from TFC3 last year. And, we saw a fair bit of Dante Campbell. He's a tricky sort of right back. We saw a lot of Julian Dunn, who was just this 16-year-old defender that stepped into USL and was fantastic. And then they also added Rocco Romeo and Noble Okello as well. Rocco is another. I interviewed Rocco, Julian Dunn, and Noble Okello all at the same time, and they are like a combined 20 feet of defender.
Oh man.
And I
Yeah.
was standing there just feeling tiny.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
and Noble was actually training over in Germany for a little while. He had a spell at Wolfsburg, and he's got that Paul Pogba sort of defensive
Yeah. Okay.
midfielder, beastly body type. He's going to be a really interesting guy to watch. So, you know, in addition to those three groups that are sort of on the TFC2, that's going to be their base this season. There's also the first team players that'll probably be seeing more minutes down there. Liam Fraser was a key part of that core group that signed with the first team this year. And, playing behind Michael Bradley in that defensive midfielder position means there aren't going to be a lot of minutes for you with the first team.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'd expect him to feature down at two quite a bit. Ayo Akinola is a U.S. youth international that signed with the first team. And, TFC has a pretty healthy stable of forwards at the moment. So
yeah. There's one or two that are decent, I think, is a nice way to put it.
Yeah.
Some Italian guy that people like. I don't know.
Yeah. He's tricky. He's a little small,
he's okay.
And so behind Josie and Sebastian Jovinko, you're going to find your minutes tough. And that's why we saw a lot of Jordan Hamilton and Ben Spencer down with TFC2 last year. And I'd sort of expect a similar role for them this year.
Sure.
Same goes sort of for Jay Chapman, who's, he's behind Victor Vasquez. He's behind this new guy, Aguirre Akeche, that just came in. So he's going to be in a fight for minutes as well. And then, Tsubasa Endo, who we saw a lot of in TFC2 last year, he's currently not with the club, although they've expressed interest in getting it sorted out. So, there's a lot of players with that first team that are likely to see minutes down at two. And part of that is that, for the last 3 seasons, they've been playing up in Vaughan, which is a suburb of the city north, just about an hour north of downtown core. And one of the problems with it was a synthetic pitch and it wasn't a professional setup in the sense that it's the pinnacle, it's the stadium for the upper reaches of the youth soccer around here. So it's a nice little stadium. It's a comfortable little ground, but the surface is really designed for maximum use as opposed to professional level attainment sort of thing. So you got the sense that Greg Vanny and the first team were a little bit reticent to send first teamers down there when they were convalescing from any injuries. So like Nick Hagelin did his knee a couple of times. I don't know if you're going to trot him out on a pitch that you're not a big fan of.
Right, and the turf as well. Yeah.
And so this year they're splitting most of their season between BMO Field actually for the large part of it, and then a little bit at Lamport, which will be artificial turf, but it'll be new and hopefully a little better. That's where the rugby team plays as well.
Okay.
And then of course they're playing that handful of games out in Rochester. So at the moment, which is what it is. I'm glad they were able to help out the.
Well, and as soon as they announced that, I'm sure you went, well, we're closest, so.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad they were able to help out a team that has a long history in North America, and TFC2's attendance last year wasn't great. Part of that is being up north of the city, and this year is expected to be a little bit better. But it is what it is.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely a lot to chew on there, and I think we've seen the MLS2 sides that have had success are ones that have a blend of some of those older guys, and as much it is things on the pitch where they can almost act as coaches for those teenagers and those kids that are in their early 20s or the kids just getting out of college. A lot of it is stuff that you and I or just people in general don't get to see a whole lot of in terms of the locker room things and kind of how to carry themselves as professionals. So, definitely nice to see. I've always kind of liked the kids in Toronto, Edwards and Hundal and Cavalluzzo and those guys who I think have been, for a team that hasn't played well, they don't act like they're, on a bad team. Like you could put them pretty much in, any USL team, they'd fit right in. But it's nice to see that, in year 4, it looks like there's kind of that group coming together where you have that spine of USL guys. And then there's some mix between, old veterans and sort of the academy kids looking to prove themselves at a pro level. So definitely a familiar story, but that's one that I like hearing about for sure.
Yeah. Two funny stories that have sort of come up over the years of covering this team are, Jason Hernandez is a veteran that they signed sort of to be a utility safety center back, and he's currently not with the club, but there's some talk that he's likely to return as well. And we saw him down with TFC2 for one game when they played away in I want to say it was Tampa early in the beginning of the year. And seeing him in practice, seeing him train with the first team, the level of competition that you get from a veteran like that in terms of it may be a Tuesday training match, he's not likely to play. The guy who he's yelling at is not likely to play, but if you take one play off, he's going to be on you.
Yep.
And that was something that Alex Bono related. He spent some time down with TFC2 when he was first drafted, and he said one of the difficulties was sort of, you're trying to make your way in the professional game, and for some of these 16-year-olds, that hasn't clicked yet. Like they don't realize that you're playing for a contract and that you're playing to feed your family and you're playing for a job. And for them, it's still sort of, the next level of their youth program. And I think we've seen with what TFC2 has experienced these last couple of years is that those players are starting to get that. They're starting to understand. And I think that's something that Laurent will really instill within them, as well as those veterans who come down.
Sure. That's a great point. Seriously, that's I know a very feisty Irishman. It's the same way on Bethlehem side of things, and I swear to God, first preseason game, he's yelling at the linesman.
Yeah,
and it's one of those things. It's like that doesn't. What does that do other than show that you're willing to fight for those kids or the guys that you're playing with and for you and I, it's ridiculous and a hilarious thing. But I'm sure for the guys that actually play the sport and everything, that's a huge thing to see.
Well, it's sometimes soccer is a game where like the ebbs and flows of the match can really sort of get away from you if you're a young player, and that's something we sort of saw with TFC2 last season. Was I didn't watch them as much in the earlier years as I did last year. But they were in most of their games last year, and it was just sort of when things got really tough, they didn't have that one person to put their foot on the ball and sort of dictate the rhythm and sort of get everyone together and be like, okay, we hold it here, we stop this now.
Right? Yeah. You can slow down. You don't have to go 100 miles an hour for 90 minutes when you have a 1-goal lead or whatever. Right?
Exactly. Just that savvy to sort of to take control of a situation and to wrestle it back from the opposition. And I think that's something that we're going to see from some of those older guys, some of those guys with that bit more of a little bit more nous when it comes to managing the game this year.
Sure. Yeah. And then, any I'll kind of lump these together. Any marquee matchups and rivalries. Obviously there's one another team in your province, and then anything that you're looking forward to as far as the league itself is concerned, heading into this year that might not be a TFC2 thing.
Yeah, in terms of the rivalries, aside from the obvious one being Ottawa, one of the more fascinating things last year was that for a team that really struggled when it came to playing those first place teams, they really gave them a run for their money. Charlotte, Charlotte, Charleston, like they beat both of them, and took some points and generally put in really good showings in those matches. So I'm very curious to see how the side sort of handles that this year. I was joking with Jason Bent that he should start lying to the players and just tell them that every team they were playing against was at the top of the table. He didn't think that was a very good idea, but I mean, that's why he's a coach and I'm not,
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Well, it's also why that's also why he moved up. Maybe, he went, well, no, let's try that out. James has a decent idea. Let's bring in somebody else from France and maybe he'll be more game for it. So
yeah. I'm going to put that one in my back pocket. And so, for Ottawa, having that local rivalry, I know it's a North American derby, but I mean, it's all we can ask for around here. It's about a 4.5, 5-hour drive up to Ottawa. And, the competition between the two, one is the provincial capital and one is the national capital. Our hockey teams, the Ottawa Senators and the Toronto Maple Leafs have a battle of Ontario.
Yep.
So to have it in soccer form, it got a little feisty in a couple of meetings last year. It definitely has that feel of this is a team in particular that you really want to lay an extra beating on. There is the slightly strange aspect that the first team in Toronto can also meet Ottawa in the Voyageurs Cup when they play. So there's something a little bit different about it in the sense that for Ottawa, they would definitely get up for playing the first team. That for them is sort of their chance at grabbing some national spotlight, some attention to themselves. Whereas when you're playing TFC2, it's a little more subdued. And Ottawa has really doubled down on sort of bringing in Canadian talent. And, for our national team program, which needs guys to be playing as much as possible, I think it can only be good, as a bit of a homer for Canadian soccer. Sure. As far as around the rest of the league, one of the things that really has caught my eye in this last offseason, I didn't watch as much of the rest of the league as I wish I had last year.
Sure.
But I was very impressed with just watching this Toronto-Colorado series in the Champions League. Enzo Martinez was probably the best player on the pitch for Colorado. And he caught my eye last year with some of the performances he was putting in. To see Chris Wehan sign with San Jose, to see Sebastian Ibiaga just end up with NYCFC. I'm very curious to see who sort of raises their head above the parapet in USL and sort of puts themselves on the radar for a move up. And I know it's always sort of tough with the tiers, and there's always going to be this squabbling between which tier is which and which is better and who belongs where and how the pyramid should look. But I mean, for players to really sort of put their names on the map and, earn themselves a chance up in MLS is something that I find very interesting.
Right on. Yeah. And, it's funny, the USL and maybe not the league itself, but the players that teams are bringing in this year, and you and TFC2 have a little bit more experience in the league than I do, coming in when Bethlehem did the year after. But this year, it definitely seems like the diversity in terms of the countries guys are coming in from is a lot wider. Do you see more Irish guys coming in? You mentioned you signed somebody from Africa. We signed somebody from Zambia, which I believe is a first in the United States at any level professionally. Prosper Chalua, which is just a brilliant name. And he'll be on loan, and he's looked really well in training. I'm trying to think, who else, and just, a lot more guys that aren't necessarily from the United States. And that's only good for the USL. And then to see the guys, like you're saying, your Enzo Martinez, your Mitch Hildebrand, obviously with Atlanta, Imi Haga, or however you say his last name, which I'm just going to butcher regardless of how I even try it. So, the defender from San Antonio, where New York City finally, learned that they can do that, which is exciting. and bring up a team from their USL affiliate or a player from their USL affiliate. So it's great to see the USL grow as much as it has in the last year or two even, and to see MLS and those front offices recognizing that and bringing those guys in, and for those guys to not look uncomfortable when they're there is huge for sure.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the sourcing from players around the globe, the willingness to look at Division 2, whereas before maybe it was off the radar. I think that just speaks to sort of the maturation of the game here in
Yes.
general, where when it comes to professional soccer, you can't really have prejudices. You can't say, oh, we're not going to look there because maybe in the past it didn't work. You can't have biases, and I really sort of feel like what we've seen in the landscape in general is sort of a bit more of a willingness to get outside of your comfort zone and to try different things and to look beyond your sort of immediate field of vision, and that can only be good for the game as a whole.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, wow, that's good stuff. I want people to tweet us or you or a wide combination of both of those, and just I need thoughts on that because I think we're on to something there. And at the sake of being labeled as having the league in my pocket or anything like that, I don't think that I'm not going to say it's a conceited or a driven effort from USL to maybe go outside of traditional boundaries or places where you'd think that people would show up to America from. But yeah, it's definitely, I think there's evidence to back us up a little bit there.
No, you never know. You never know where talent's going to come from.
Oh, for sure.
Got to keep your eyes open.
Yeah, no doubt. You had some questions or some talking points for myself or just people in general.
I guess just what I wanted to mention was sort of like for the lack of success that we've sort of seen from TFC2 when it comes to USL in terms of the development of players. We're starting to see the fruits of that. We already spoke about Raheem Edwards and we spoke about Liam Fraser sort of graduating up to the first team, but aside from that, Mark Anthony Kay, who was in Louisville last year, he's down with LAFC now, and he's a TFC Academy product. Quillen Roberts is on trial with LAFC as well, and he's a guy who spent some time here. And then, Jordan McCrary, who, New England drafted a couple of years ago, and then TFC2 brought him in last year. He just signed with the Seattle Sounders. And so, you guys have Brandon Aubrey down there, and I'm sure though last year was a bit tough on him and he wasn't, able to keep a place in Toronto, I'm sure that experience has done a lot of good for him. And another one of the guys that they let go, Mitch Tainer, has found himself in Sacramento.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of that sort of dual role, trying to wear both hats of developing and winning, it's a slow process, but I think we're starting to see the fruits of that,
Yeah, for sure. And, it's one of those things I think, and again, I hate sounding biased or anything, but it is the club that I'm closest to and the one that I follow and the one that lets me hang out and, ask questions and they don't think I'm terribly stupid. So that's exciting. But for Bethlehem, I think for them, the first year was a lot better than anyone could have hoped for in terms of developing players and things like that, or even just the results they had because they were right in the thick of the playoff race till they dropped points against Orlando City B in the last game of the season. Then they made the playoffs this year, and honestly, I think the more people find out or the more people know or the more that's out there about the academies that these teams get to draw from, because Toronto and Philly do have really, really solid academy programs. The easier it's going to be for people to understand the idea behind an MLS2 team, I think is kind of what it comes down to.
I think, like, I'm not sure about the situation there in Philadelphia, but I presume it's somewhat similar where when you're the professional club and you're landing this sort of mothership in an area that has a pre-existing structure,
sure,
there's always those sort of little headbutting situations that go on, like a youth club that has a player they really like and they don't really want to let him go to the professional outfit because he's helping them win trophies and he's putting them on. And so it's been a 10-year struggle here in Toronto to sort of build those relationships and mend fences and hurt feelings that have come along the way. And so I think it's one of those things where it takes a long time to formalize a structure that was previously very ad hoc.
Mm,
So the
mm-hmm.
longer these academy systems are there, the longer these USL2 teams are there. Like that's one of the reasons that, Vancouver deciding not to return their team was very disappointing, in the sense that,
Sure. Sure.
you need that bridge, and it may not look like it's paying off for the investment that you're putting in right now, but with
Mm-mm.
time it will start to.
Yeah, and that's a weird thing that's been happening, and obviously we don't know what's going on with Orlando City B, because we're pretty sure they're going to come back as a D3 to kind of lessen, like you were saying, that financial impact. But speaking of the impact, FC Montreal was the thing, and then they dropped that, and the Whitecaps too bowed out. So, but then on the flip side of that, you see teams like DC is kicking around the idea of starting a USL team, and Atlanta United, too, is a thing that's happening. So it's weird, because for all the teams that drop out, they kind of point to the financial aspects of things, or they don't really explain why they're going away, or they say they're taking a hiatus and things like that. But for all the teams that buy in on the MLS side of things and make a 2-team, you always see them point to, well, for us, we wanted that kind of full control over what happens after these kids graduate from our academy.
Yeah, the FC Montreal thing is really interesting, and they've sort of formed a partnership with Ottawa, but
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe 2 or 3 players ended up joining the Fury last year when FC
Right.
Montreal sort of decided that they wouldn't play on, and then you see Balou Tabla end up at Barcelona B.
Right. Yeah.
And
yeah, I forgot. How did I forget? Because it's so crazy to me that happened is how I forgot about that. That's
I know, but I mean, like, think about how many, if you can produce a player like that every 3, 4, 5 years.
Right. That's got to cover the cost of that team for that long, for sure. You'd imagine.
Exactly. And then, you're stocking a couple of guys into your first team every year or two.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't see how it doesn't work out financially in the long term.
Sure. Well, and I mean, that's at the end of the day, it comes down to who are the guys in charge, because I think some front offices, and to Toronto's credit, they didn't have to go, yep, we want to have a 2-team, because they're doing well. I mean, historically not a great side in MLS, unfortunately, but in recent years they've somehow money turned that around and become kind of the envy of the East. And for a team like that that's on top, and I'll give credit for Seattle and Portland and Real Salt Lake has the Monarchs and everything. There's these successful franchises, Red Bull, another example, that don't need to do this, that do it because they know the philosophy behind it and they buy into that. So I don't know, maybe showing Montreal or Vancouver, or some of these other teams, or Orlando City even, that, they go, well, it's just not for us after 2 years. And then you go, well, think about it from this way, where what if you can find a bunch of bench options, or heaven forbid, a couple of starters for, pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely an interesting organizational decision,
And the way that I sort of see it is, here in North American sports, we're used to franchises, and sort of the upper professional expression of that is what we're most familiar with. Whereas the world of, world football sort of works on this club system.
Yes.
And the teams that are willing to invest in their academy, to invest in USL teams, they're accepting that that's how the world does it. And they're seeing that is what's worked everywhere, and that is what they want to do. Whether it turns out to be the right choice, we'll have to see. But, in my opinion, I think it is. So.
Well, James, I appreciate it. That was a great time, and hopefully people don't mind us talking about MLS, a very MLS2 specific episode, I suppose.
Yeah.
But, I think it helps. And, I think a lot of times, and I don't know if it's your experience at all, but there might be, and it's not everybody, and I'm not even saying it's a decent chunk of the minority of people, but every so often in your mentions or whatever, or I don't know if on Waking the Red or anything, people will go, oh, why do you care about TFC2? And then you go, well, look at all those guys that I saw 3 years ago, and things like that. So I hope between the two of us talking and things like that, people might have a different outlook on 2 teams, or at least kind of understand where we're coming from. That's all I can hope to do. So real quick, feel free to plug yourself and tell everyone where they can find you on the internet, among other things, and then we can get out of here.
All right. For TFC2 purposes, I cover the team for Waking the Red over at SB Nation, and we'll be ramping that up in the coming weeks. I also covered Toronto FC for MLSsoccer.com and TorontoFC.ca. So if you're ever interested in how they're doing as they prepare for Tigres in the CONCACAF Champions League, feel free to look me up. And then on Twitter, you can follow me at Grossi, and it's sort of a bastardization of my last name. GRAWSEE.
I got to tell you, the first time I went to grab your Twitter handle, I went, God damn it! Like, why didn't I do that or something? Because like that's just such a solid handle. Anyway, yep. I'm jealous is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, definitely. Appreciate you coming on. Feel free anytime you want to hop back on, talk Toronto FC2. I'll probably try to get like an MLS2 team roundtable or something going around the halfway point of the season. So I'll invite you to that now, just so that I can hold you to it. And then other than that, really appreciate you coming on and taking time out of your, I'm sure, hectic-ish schedule to talk to me.
Oh, anytime, man. I really enjoyed it.
All good, James. Appreciate it.
All right, take care, man.